Hey everyone, and welcome to my first ever tutorial. Today I'm going to guide you through a program I use to help me with human anatomy and posing in my artworks. For anyone else like me that's still learning how to draw the human form or struggles to present characters in a physically possible and visually appealing way, I believe DesignDoll could be a huge help to you. I'll be covering everything I believe a beginner should know and a few top tips I have. By the end of this class and video, you will have created your own custom model, set it in a nice character stapling pose, and hopefully feel more confident in using this 3D model program overall. So without further ado, let's get started. DesignDoll is a software program that can manipulate human-based models in a 3D space. Unfortunately, at this time it is not compatible with Apple Mac and can only be installed through Windows. So I'm sorry Apple users who may be watching, but you'll have to keep hunting through the internet for alternatives. While DesignDoll is available as a free program, there is an official license you can buy that unlocks exclusive features for the one-off cost of $79 USD, the price at the time of this recording. I know a tad pricey, but it's a totally optional license, and I was a free user for a fairly long time before I upgraded, so don't feel pressured to fork out. DesignDoll can create poses and compositions that artists can use for both our digital and traditional medium artworks. There are other basic or more in-depth 3D modeling programs out there to choose from, but I found DesignDoll to be a relatively easy to learn option with pretty intuitive controls. More advanced programs tend to scare me when I first open them up. Some of the benefits with DesignDoll that drew me to the program were: number 1, the minimalistic but still fine-tunable control system for posing the models. 2, the library of presets for things like model surface effects and hand poses. 3, the body shape sliders that you can adjust to customize the body type of your model. 4, the ability to create multiple models and interactive compositions. 5, you can also work with a variety of dynamic perspectives and viewing angles. And 6, lastly, you can create both male and female models, young or old, skinny or fat or muscular, with funny body ratios and all that jazz. Think of the body shaping part of the Sims 4 character creator as if it was on steroids. And that's only a fraction of what DesignDoll is capable of. Have I piqued your interest yet? Alright, so you've installed DesignDoll. You've opened it up and made sure it's okie dokie lemon pokey. Sweet. So you should have this creepy faceless humanoid standing there staring off into the distance right now. This is your default model that will pop up into existence every time you open DesignDoll. We'll get around to tweaking your model later, but if you want to adjust the environment your model is in, stick with me as I walk you through the different preferences you can change that made working in DesignDoll just a little easier on the eyes and help speed up the exporting process to use finished models as references later on. First up, head over to the Tool button here in the navigation bar and click on Preferences. This will open up a window of different settings. Some I understand, some I don't. This is only a beginner's guide and a walkthrough of how I use the program, so I'm sorry if I can't help you with all the details at this point in time. Alright, first up, we've got a main effect and an operational effect. Now, your main effect is the way the model will appear when everything is standing still, when you're getting ready to export or save an image of your model. Now, to save you from cycling through the different options yourself, I'll show the variations and their names here that you can choose from. On any given day, I'll juggle between low and high quality for my main effect. While high quality refines your model and includes the color and lighting effects you can set, sometimes you just want to be less distracted and cut out the rendering. In other words, low quality equals more flat looking. For now, we'll set it to low quality just so it's not rendering any effects while we customize the model. The operational effect is the setting on your model that will be shown as you move it around. If you zoom, rotate, or move the camera around your model, it will adjust to the secondary selection to help your computer cope with the added level of processing. In other words, you'll need a decently powered computer to have high quality running for both effects. I set the operational effect to low quality these days. It helps the DesignDoll time-lapse moments in my videos appear smoother and less jarring if I don't use the wireframe inclusive options, while I make my main effect low quality as well. I personally don't have a need for the wireframes anyway. Now, if you're using DesignDoll only as a model creator and posing program like me, the rest of the settings on the Effect tab will not be of any real importance to you apart from the anti-aliasing option at the bottom. You know those rough fuzzy edges you see in-game on old school or weaker systems like the PS1 and older Nintendo handhelds like the 3DS? Well, if you want to smooth things out, and again, it's totally dependent if your computer can handle it or not, you'll want to bump up that setting to as high of a number as you can get. That way the outline or edge of your models won't, for lack of a better term, fizzle or look like it was outlined in early Microsoft Paint. That done, next select the Rendering tab, and for now we're only going to concentrate on the background settings. Now this is really only based on your own personal preferences as well. If you're going to use your finished model as a reference image or anatomy base like myself, and don't really plan to do much with the atmosphere of your composition, I suggest you select the solid fill in the drop-down menu, and then adjust the color here to be white. That way you'll be able to print off or place your models in your art programs with a clear background that won't interfere with anything. Next, I suggest you select the System tab and mouse down to the Max Undo level and bump that up to at least 30 or higher. There's nothing more annoying than trying to undo your adjustments to a state you liked before, but then you hit the end of the recorded history way before you've even gotten close to what you wanted. That about sums up everything I would adjust in the preferences at this point. The last tab I might recommend you guys scroll through is Shortcuts. If you have a certain way you want to work with this program, you can personalize the keyboard shortcuts you want to use here. Or perhaps you can't figure out a shortcut for a tool or button you're using. You can scroll through here and see if there is one already set for it. Keyboard shortcuts are designed to make your workflow faster and easier, so definitely make the time to learn them and use them. And lastly, I want to give you guys a quick tip for customizing the tools of your program to suit you. For one, take note of these little yellow and gray bars that you can find around the DesignDoll program. Perhaps you're having issues with the size of the program interface. If so, you can resize the buttons and the previews you'll be dealing with by dragging the yellow part to be larger or smaller. Want buttons bigger? Done. Want your preset body type images to be smaller so you don't have to scroll down and search so much? Done. All personalized and looking fabulous? Sweet! Moving on. Alrighty, so you've got your workspace how you want it. It's time to learn how to play with the camera. So holding down the spacebar on your keyboard along with the left mouse button, you can adjust your view of the model and the environment it is in from left to right and up and down. So plop that model in the center of your view as best you can. Another alternative you can use is to hold down your mouse on this arrowed crosshair button that sits here in the top right of the navigation bar. It will actually show you a bunch of other ways you can use the same action in the drop-down description if you hover over it long enough. You can expect these helpful tip drop-downs for most, if not all, the buttons and tools you can find on DesignDoll. Just know from now on I'll be referencing the way I myself use the different navigation methods. Next, you can then rotate your view and angle by holding down the Alt button on your keyboard and left mouse button, and then move your mouse around till you have the model staring into your soul. This camera action corresponds to the circling arrows button you can see here in the navigation bar. Now, you may be feeling like you're too close to the model at this point and want to give yourself some breathing room. Quick fix, hold down both Alt and Control buttons on your keyboard along with your left mouse button and move it left or back to zoom out as well as right or forward to zoom in up close and personal.
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Demir.
Ahem. Yes, quite. And this action corresponds to the little magnifying glass that sits right next to the last two adjusters we've worked with. That only leaves this cute little camera as the last button up here to introduce you to. Now, I don't really use this particular camera adjustment very much myself, but I want to make sure I cover all the basics for you. So while the basic rotate function will orbit around the model like the moon around the Earth, this camera adjustment rotates the camera itself. Now you're the center of the gravitational pull in this metaphor. You're pegged down and you can only turn your head. So if you ever find that you're not rotating around your model just right, it may be that your focal point has been moved off center with this adjustment. There's also a handful of quick preset camera angles you can use keyboard shortcuts to skip to. You can find them and the corresponding shortcuts here in the navigation bar under Camera and 3D View Functions. These presets can be great if you don't want to move the camera around yourself. All the side, front, and back views will be perfect if you ever want to set up turnaround references of your first character models. For example, I used the front and back preset to help capture the base for my Spider-Sona character sheet more quickly a while back. And now the last camera element I want to cover with you guys. Click this tab to open the effects window. Now don't get distracted by all the different baubles that just popped up, we'll get to those later, but in the meantime I only need you to focus on these icons here, specifically this isometric cube to the left. This button toggles a feature that DesignDoll calls parallel projection. Now don't ask me exactly what that means because I have no clue, but from my experience working with it, having this effect enabled allows you to pose your model without the distance between objects and the camera having any perspective effect. Plainly speaking, if a model's hand is placed closer to the camera than the rest of the model, the hand won't appear any bigger as a result. This kind of style I would recommend for character design layouts where you want a flattened and unwarped view of your character from all sides as it stands there. But if you turn the feature off like this, you're suddenly able to work with that coveted foreshortening that can make any illustration pop more dramatically. You want that hand to reach out and grab your face? The FOV slider next to the parallel projection button lets you adjust the atmosphere of the environment you're working with and how exaggerated the foreshortening will be. In the drop-down tip, it will give you a couple different numbers you can use to start with, but the basic guide is that the lower the number you use, the more of a telephoto zoom look you can get. And the higher the number, the more wide-angle shot look you'll get. But let's work with a juicy 50 for now, just to give you an idea. You can see now that when we zoom in on that hand and toggle the projection button off and on, you can really see the difference. It goes from uncomfortable baby arm to something that actually makes visual sense in the long run. And the last thing I want to point out before we leave the camera behind is this camera history button right here. To put it plainly, if you want your camera to move back to that perfect angle you had earlier before you moved around to adjust your model from a different view, well, look no further. Click the button, then scroll back and select the previous 3D view state you made. The adjustments you made to the model will stay the same, but the view you have of it will revert back to your previous choice. Now let's dive into arguably the most important process you'll need to learn when creating your model references. Now for this, I recommend you work with the parallel projection turned on so you see the shape of your model without any distortion. From there, head over and click this button known as the morphing tag, which will then open up the shaping options for the body of your model. So your design model's overall shape is customized by changing the preset sliders shown in each body part section shown here. As you can see, the default head is dabbling in a bunch of different options to get the version you're seeing right now. As an experiment, if we set everything to 0 to start with a clean slate, you get this very old school anime girl face. Now that could be what you're after in the long run, and if so, then sweet, you can skip ahead and start to experiment with the rest of the body shapes. If you're like me and want a more realistic proportioned model, however, then here is when you need to grab a couple portraits of the type of general body type you want to recreate, be it female or male, to refer back to as you begin to shape your character. If you're creating a male character, I suggest you use this head preset 5 as your dominant base and start adding values of other faces till you get the look you want. If, however, you're working alongside me and creating a woman, then I'm going to reset the face back to the program's default and then use the head preset number 2 as my dominant base and boost its slider to 100. Now let's all agree this currently looks like a scared or yelling young woman right now. Oh, and don't worry about the proportion of the head compared to the body as of yet, as this can be changed further down the line after we finish defining the body shape if it's still out of proportion at the end of the shaping. From here, we're going to start adding different face shape values. It's easy to just mess around in this stage, so don't feel like there's a right or wrong kind of face you could end up with. Having a general face reference or idea in mind is good practice, but in my time using DesignDoll, I've personally shaped the features of my collection of defaults as I've judged them by eye and trial and error. I'm going to recreate a young woman with you guys today. Older teen to late 20s range. So I'll be focusing on the face presets that have softer features. We're talking soft rounded cheeks and noses with less pronounced brows and jaws. That should do it. As DesignDoll doesn't have fine detailed face editing, I suggest you only aim to create a basic shape, as refining the shape and the sizes of the nose, ears, and mouth can be left to interpretation in your drawing. You're better off leaving those details either up to the portrait you're using as reference or your own drawing style. Now let's move on to the upper torso tab. Here you can add muscle tone as well as breasts. Remember, using references and looking at your model from all angles while shaping is key to editing any and all parts of the body. So let's start building up your female model with an hourglass figure. Slim, slightly muscular hourglass figures seem to be my preference these days. Totally up to you the body type you want to build, but a curvy body type is my go-to form. So these adjustments helps build up the line of the collarbone and gives a nice basic breast shape. The size of them I don't adjust in the shaping, but rather leave that step for later when we'll be working with the weight and placement rigs. But first we're shaping her out. Next up we're going to work her waist. Selecting the lower torso tab in the shaping menu, you can see a bunch of body variations that let you build muscle tone, cinched waist, cliche muscle man proportions, or even Yogi Bear bellies. Now arms are a little more finicky in my experience. They give you a range of muscle tone from skinny round planks to buffed up muscle man. Unfortunately you can't shape the hands, so you're stuck with the default ones that they figure are androgynous, but you can expand the size of them later on in this tutorial. Which means you could potentially give your model long awkward mutant claws. But for today we'll only be adjusting her arms by a few points. Alrighty, she's got a bit more meat on her bones now, so we can finally finish her up by adjusting her legs. The options here can be very stylized in nature and could work very well if you're looking to create a more cartoon-like model. Think skinny ankles and fat calf muscles. In their default state, they're actually not that bad to be honest. But this is how I shape my girl's legs to give a bit more tone like we're working with an active runner. And voila! So we're all shaped up, but she doesn't look quite right as of yet. The proportions are wrong and the overall form is not very smoothed out or even close to an average healthy looking young woman yet. No fear though, from here we can change the proportions of her body by selecting this magnifying glass icon that they call the scale tag. Yeah, don't ask me why they thought that icon was a good representation for what this tool does, but it's key that you learn how to use it. So you've now got this grey rig overlay appearing on your model. You can think of it like the model's skeleton in a way. Using the scale tag, you'll be able to adjust the length and thickness of the body as well as the height of your model as a whole. Not to mention, you can actually pull the limbs off the body altogether as well, but that's something you guys can mess around with another day. When you're working with more than one character model, you might have certain heights they need to be when in comparison to each other. So before we start going into the resizing details, head down here to the set height button. Let's make our girl a decent 160 centimeters. Sorry you people that want to work in feet or inches, you'll have to get used to the centimeter system in this program. And don't worry if you forget to set the height at this point. In the future you can always set your character height later and all your adjustments will stay the same. Side note before we get started, a funny thing I only came to notice the other day was this mirror option sitting here. Now if you're feeling devious, you can turn this off and really start messing with the anatomy of your model by making alternate limbs bigger than the other. You could give her a massive foot and a tiny one. But remember,
with great power comes great responsibility.
Back on track, people. So that head is looking a bit too big and that neck too thick for my liking. So let's fix that by selecting the rig tab on her neck. Take note of the information that pops up on the bottom right hand corner here that has a nice summary of measurement information recorded for the selected part of your model. This will help you if you really want to dive into the details with more precise consideration. With your neck rig selected, it will show you the branches that can expand, contract, and move the neck on an X and Y axis as well as the overall scale. The blue branch, for example, will make the height of your model's neck longer or shorter by selecting the square and dragging your mouse up or down respectively. I'm only going to extend it by a couple points, as you can see in the info table. Remember, you can either work from reference or just customize your model to what looks right by eye. With the red branch, you can adjust the neck's X thickness width, which is the depth between the left and right side of the neck. Rotate your view to see the side of your model, and you'll see the last branch is a green one that will adjust the Y thickness, aka the depth between the front and the back of your neck. So I've changed my neck to be a 0.94 length, a 0.95 X thickness, and lastly a 0.74 Y thickness. So that's the amount of muscle and fat, for lack of better terms, I want built into the neck all around. But we're not quite done yet. As you can see, there are some arrowheads and spheres on the branches that we haven't even touched. So these adjust the body parts offsets, which are tallied up in the same information table to your right. These are the controls responsible for the stretch and the bend of your selections, or the ability to pull whole body parts straight off. So holding down the mouse on the blue arrow and pulling upwards, we're going to pull the muscles of her neck up and longer, adjusting the start offset to 1.7. But don't panic, I'm not going to give her a permanent giraffe neck. Next, select the sphere on the end and drag it to pull the head back down to make the end offset a negative 0.1. Now this next step is just my personal preference, so you can ignore this adjustment, but if you rotate around the model to see your green branch, I then use the arrowhead to pull the side offset Y to a 1.0 to straighten up her posture a bit. And voila, she's done. Well, her neck is anyway. We still have a bit more customization to do. So despite the changes to the neck, she's still looking a bit young due to the ratio of her head versus her neck and shoulders. So to finish this part of the body off, I'm going to select the rig of her face, and we're going to work it a bit smaller and higher, aging her tad. Next we'll work with a small tab here that extends from the center of her chest. By selecting this, we're going to adjust the connecting area of the chest to 0.94 in both length and thickness. As you can see, everything is even already, so to save time because you want to adjust the length and thickness numbers equally anyway, you can select this white square here, and dragging to your right, you can expand the area in its entirety. It's only a slight difference, but small changes add up in the end. Let's also make the exact same adjustment to the horizontal rig next to the chest one we just changed by using the white square to even out the ratio of her head and shoulders. Now if you want to adjust your model to be a bit more busty, select the tab in the middle of her upper torso between her breasts. Here is where I adjust the model's cup size. As I'm aiming for a decently curvy figure, I'm going to bump her up a couple sizes as she's sitting in the A to B cup range at the moment. With that, we've upped her cup size, arched her back, and in turn made it so her shoulders appear more pulled back and confident without even posing her yet. Now you've been glaring at that waist for a while now, haven't you? Behold, it's the old school Disney version of a young woman's waist in their animated classic range. Nope, you guessed it. We're gonna shape her out to look a little more fed, starting with the tab on her belly button before we make our way down to each tab between her ribs and hips. From here on out, I'm going to cruise through the sizing and placement. Feel free to customize your model's form however you want though. There we go, no more Little Mermaid waist. She's got a mildly cinched waist that leads into her hips, where before we were pushing the look of a corset cutting off your air supply, complete with missing bones and muscles. But hey, if that's what you want, feel free to undo by holding the Ctrl and Z button on your keyboard. Now in true near 2B fashion, I like to give my girls the legs for days look, so next I'm gonna work on them. Besides some little adjustments to the arms, these hands just need a little resizing as well. If you hold your own hand up to your head and line it up with your jaw, most young adult women's hands will extend the length of the face. So with that in mind, let's tweak her arms and hands. Wicked, she's all done. This is my current go-to model for my female pose references at the moment. Now, if you're a free DesignDoll user and you want to use this model again in the future, I would recommend that you take note of the settings used in order to help recreate her without issue. Users without a license aren't able to open save DesignDoll programs. Now we're going to dive into the most important process you guys have watched this video for, the posing element. It's time to mouse over and select the pose tag that I briefly introduced you to in the free versus paid breakdown. It sort of looks like a cropped T-pose, which is kind of appropriate, don't you think? Opening up this tag, you'll scroll down to see a separated human diagram and 3 optional settings that can either help or hinder your posing in the long run. By default, I keep all these settings turned on. The shoulder and wrist links refer to the behavior of the connecting limb. If you had the shoulder link on, when you move your model's arm, it will automatically move the connecting shoulder to suit the new position. This is best shown if you take the model's arm and pull it straight up above the head. The same thing happens for the wrist link. If you rotate the wrist, the forearm will move along with it, emulating how the real-life muscle connecting your wrist and your forearm would behave. It's a very smooth effect, so it won't snap around like crazy when you rotate the wrist a little. Then lastly, the auto foot correction is something I find pretty handy when you're working with in motion, crouched, or high-heeled poses. So DesignDoll has a floor your model can stand on or objects be placed onto, though sometimes by default the model doesn't automatically rest directly on the floor surface. To fix this, you can mouse over to the position tag that has the flag on it. This generates the position and angle adjustment rig for your model. The arrows on the different rigs very clearly show you where you can move, rotate, and tilt your model in each direction. You can choose to use the rig that surrounds your model or the mini rig that appears at the bottom right hand corner. This can be helpful so you don't have to rotate or adjust the zoom of your view too much while you're working. However, we're not going to do anything major with this tag yet, apart from mouse over to the button that says Rest Model on Ground, and click that to make sure we're working with a fully grounded character. If you ever notice that your model is phasing through the floor or floating in space when you don't want them to, you can always pop back and select this button and it will automatically pull your character down to its lowest point of contact, be it their feet or their butt, or hands if you got your character doing a handstand for some weird reason. For now, let's head back into the pose tag and let's cover the basics involved in posing your model. So settle in and pay attention. You'll see you have a few new points overlaid on your model with this tag that shows you some of the rigs you can manipulate. Let's start off by introducing you to bending. The square settled between their hips acts as the core of your model, their center of gravity. So if you click and drag that around, you can sit your model down into an invisible chair, lift them up like a ragdoll, or sway their lower body around like a hula dancer. Do note that the model's limbs like to stay where they are, so if you want to sit your character down on the ground, you're going to have to work their arms and legs afterwards to make them look less demon-possessed. The other 2 squares further up the torso act in a similar fashion. Drag them up, down, and side to side and you'll be able to bend the different sections to help create less stiff or straight up and down poses. Now let's select the square in between the hips. This will now highlight the same rig on the mini model preview in the bottom right hand corner. This preview shows your model at an eye level angle and 90-degree difference from the main view you're currently using. Just like the position tag, this second preview can save you time by cutting out your rotating view process in order to move your rigs in alternate directions. Also, in selecting this particular rig, 2 extra controls above and below the square will become available. With this small rectangle button on top, you can arch and bend the spine of your model. Want a proud peacock? Click and drag your mouse up and you'll see your model arch up and pop out their chest. The default position is pretty straight up as it is, so the difference isn't drastic. But if you want a hunchback in contrast, click and drag that rig down and you'll soon have an old lady with a broken back, complete with a bunched up stomach. This rig will also help when you're working with a sitting model if you want to emphasize their shyness. As an example, you'd curl them down to help make your character bundle inward as small as possible. Then lastly, the arrowhead button on the hips rig lets you pivot your model forward and backward from that fixed anchor point, keeping everything else unaffected. Work all these torso rigs together and they become the key to posing your model into more interesting lines of motion, sitting or lounging positions. Next is twisting. For this, you're not selecting any of the rigs. You're instead selecting the general upper or lower torso areas with your mouse and holding the button down while you drag it from side to side to twist these sections of the model. Say for example, you want to create an interesting line of motion to your character, adding a nice rotation to the torso so you're not dealing with a front-on army formation stance. Here we can pop and twist the hip like a model in a fashion photo shoot as we work with bending and twisting the torso. There we go, a little more visually interesting. It's always nice to keep in mind a line of motion or general gesture in your poses, just to mix things up. Just like how we twisted the torso by selecting general areas before, the same applies to the shoulders, arms, and legs. In adjusting the shoulders, you can pull them up, down, forward, and back. Maybe you want to roll their shoulders forward to play up shyness or bad posture. Or the total opposite, you may want to pull them backward to flash their confidence. Next is the arms, and I'm going to show you how to work them to the point where you can rest her right arm onto her hip and lift her left into her invisible hair. Rotate your view around to get a better look at her right arm, and we're going to make her limbs help contribute to her pose rather than have them lay there limp and useless. Select the rig on her wrist and you'll be able to drag and move her entire arm around in a variety of positions. Limbs in DesignDoll can go a bit drunk at times if you overwork them or pull them in odd directions, but you can always fine tune things later so the arms don't look, well,
gross! You nasty!
So lift the wrist up in line with the top of her hip, and from there you can use your mini view to pull it closer to her body and rest it on the curve of her hip. Don't worry that the hand clips through the body, as that's where the fine tuning comes into play later. With her hand resting on her hip, her arm is going to need to pop outwards in a more natural and comfortable position. To do that, using the outer ring of the wrist rig, you can pivot her arm, kind of like if you were to do a chicken dance arm flap. You want to rotate her elbow until her arm appears almost parallel with her shoulders. So this is where a top-down or a view from the side would come in handy. You can rest your arm in a similar position to see and feel what is comfortable. It's always good practice to try out the poses you're making where physically possible in order to 1. Make sure it's physically possible, 2. To see what the physical limit should be, and 3. What the normal resting pose is. Which is why I know that when I put my arm on my hip without thinking about it, my arm naturally falls in line with my shoulders. Depending on the direction you lift the arm will make the difference between if the limb phases through her body and breaks her shoulder or not. So I recommend to get around this, you pull the arm away from the body first and arch it over to the head the long way. Kinda looks like she's gazing off into the sunny horizon while shielding her eyes now, doesn't she? Thanks to the shoulder length, the joint has naturally adjusted to the new position. However, unlike in realistic bodies, the left breast does not lift up with the arm like it should. So you'll need to keep in mind that muscles and skin do not behave exactly as DesignDoll shows. And there actually is a funny little coincidence here for those of you with a keen eye. You may have already noticed that her arms are now forming a Z shape across her form. That was totally done by accident, working those perpendicular lines. Now we can finally move on to fine tuning. You want those hands to rest on her hip and curl over her forehead where the hairline would be. So this is where you'll need to work your wrist rigs, but also the hand rigs that also appear when you select the hand of the model itself. Starting with their left hand as it's in our immediate view, click on it and you'll get a pale grey rig that appears somewhat like the position tag rig, so it will act in a similar fashion. With fine tuning, I suggest you zoom in closer to the part you're working on to get a better view. First, let's rotate the hand so the palm faces her head. Selecting the palest rig, drag it around. Now select the wrist rig to bring her hand closer and further down. Rest your own hand on your forehead, and you may notice, depending on how you hold your arm, that the wrist will bend. Now I'm working with the assumption that she's going to rest her hand on the top of her forehead, so her hand needs to line up with her head and arch backwards slightly. So you need to use the other two hand rotation rig directions like so. Then you can move the wrist rig one more time to compensate for the new adjustment. Once we finish with the arms and legs, we'll make sure that we adjust the neck and head to meet the hand in the correct way later. With the auto foot correction turned on, select the ankle rig of her left leg and lift it away from the body and slightly up so you get a nice stretched out statement leg. I know it's weird to think of a leg as making a statement, but considering our pose is currently comprised of a lot of bends and curves, I think it's appropriate to include a nice straight line in the form of her leg. For future reference, take note that the legs can be manipulated in a very similar way that the arms can. Zoom in and select the neck to bring up its rig. Tilt her neck up to remove the slight side tilt and pull it back to straighten up her posture again. Lastly, depending on your preference on the angle you like to draw faces or the position that most suits the look or personality you're going for, you can select the head to adjust the angle the same way. Today I'm going to tilt her head back so she can look down at the viewer to fit with the more confident and sassy vibe I was after. And then I throw in a little head turn so it's almost like she doesn't want to give you the courtesy of direct eye contact. Now pull that shoulder down a bit to a more natural level and rotate the forearm. And with a little more fine tuning to the hand placement, we can move on to working her fingers. Now mouse over and select the hand tag. Doing so will automatically zoom you into the model's hand. Now we want to make sure the hand fits to the hip in a more accurate fashion. So what this first section shows you is the basic position adjustments you can make. Each slider corresponds to a finger and how much you can curl it in or outwards. It's lined up in a way that you compare it to an actual hand with a thumb control off to the side. Then there's also the horizontal slider here that controls the spread of the model's fingers, or their knuckles. So first things first, this hand will spread as it shapes itself to the surface of the hip. So move the knuckle slider to the left to distribute the weight and create a stronger looking hold. Next, adjust each finger till it rests along the surface of the hip. You can zoom in and out and rotate your view of the hand like usual if you need to make sure things aren't clipping through where they shouldn't. But even if they are, the next adjustment mode will helpfully help. Select this cog here next to the finger sliders and you'll open up the more fine detail hand adjustment mode. As a general rundown, you can click and drag the lines showed in each joint of the fingers in order to adjust the angle or curl of each part. Then you can also control the spacing between fingers with the circles. They'll only bend in certain ways to keep the hand skeleton in a more realistic setup though. Now to adjust the left hand that we want to rest on the head like she's lifting her hair out of her way, you'll now need to mouse over and select the hand icon here that has the L for left on it. This will open up the other hand's adjustments. You'll automatically be directed to the other hand in question, so you won't have to worry about adjusting your camera between the two when you're making changes. You just finished posing your first model! But before we move on, while they don't apply to what we were wanting to achieve today, there are a few more extra treats in the hand tag I'd like to introduce you to, so you can utilize them in the future. First off, I'd like you to scroll your mouse down here to the button that says Load from Library. And boom, there's a bunch of preset hand gestures you can click and use on the hand you're working with. These can help you save time, but if they don't look quite right in the situation, you can always fine-tune them with the tools we worked through just before. You gotta love that peace sign they included in there. But if you decided you don't want to use any of the presets shown here, you can click this little grey box to take you back to the hand adjustment settings. The Save the Library will let you add the current hand position you've made to the library you just saw as well. As far as I know, this is a free feature you can utilize for those of you not using the licensed program. And lastly, the mirror button lets you copy the hand gesture you've got the one hand in and apply it to the other hand. These name the hands like I have labeled them till this point in the tutorial, which is from the model's point of view and not your own. So if you want to apply the forehead resting placement to the hand that's currently resting on the hip, you'd select the left to right option. And if you feel like it, you can select the flip option, which lets you swap the hand gestures rather than copy and replace one over the other. Further, you can hop into the foot tag here to make adjustments to the same level as what the hand settings offer. This step can be skipped majority of the time if the auto foot correction does its job correctly. But just so you know, all the same fine-tuning options are there. With all that covered, we're ready for the next step. Now let's get our model ready to export. Before we do anything, please make sure you now have the main effect preview of your model set to high quality and the program preferences that we covered earlier, as you will only see the next steps presented correctly with that option on. In this part, we're going to spend our time in the effects window down here, which you might remember from the camera adjustment walkthrough. So you know off the bat what the FOV and the parallel projection do to your model thanks to the earlier camera walkthrough. So from here on out, it is up to you which type of perspective style you are after for your drawing. If you're looking to create some basic character concept art, perhaps consider keeping this button turned on. But if you're after a more dynamic illustration, turn the mode off. With it turned off, if you wanted to really push the sassy and don't bother me attitude, you can rotate the camera to look up and settle it closer to her feet so she appears more dominant in your view. But if you reverse it so the camera looks down on her instead, you can edit the attitude of the piece and it will appear less intimidating, especially if you imagine she keeps eye contact with the camera in both points of view. If you want to adjust the dynamic perspectives, you will need to adjust the value of the FOV. If you want more dramatic foreshortening in your scenes, bump that number up between 45 to 60 or even higher. But if you want a more tame use of perspective, perhaps experiment around 30 to create a basic photo scene. You'll have to zoom out to see the new FOV at work, as your camera will move forward if you're changing to a lower value, or zoom in because it will pull back if you're changing the FOV to a higher value. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to use perspective in the final composition, so I'll be reverting everything to the default camera view with parallel projection turned on so I can create a concept art model. Next is your cast shadow button. Pretty straightforward. If you want a more obvious indication of your light source, you can keep this option turned on. And by using this large sphere to your left, you can click and drag to adjust where the light will hit your model. You have to think of the sphere as a bird's eye view of your model if they were to be standing up straight. That way you don't get confused. Personally, I don't believe this creates the most accurate visual representation of light interacting with your model, so look at it with a critical eye. You can also do what I do and light up as much of the general surface as possible by pulling the light source down to the bottom of the sphere, and consider how you'll want to use your lighting in the artwork itself at a later time. But in getting things ready for export, I suggest once you've chosen your light source that you turn the cast shadow off. It'll make sense later. If you haven't already changed the background fill in the preferences of your program, this next button will automatically clean the ground and background to be a solid white for model exporting later. Now I really should use this last option more often. With this, you're able to adjust the width and height ratio of your camera view. Select the 3D view only option, as that is the current camera you will be looking at your model with. If you know the size image you're going to place your model into, this will help you better plan where you place your model for exporting later. It can show you how zoomed in you can be before limbs are cut off on the page, for example. If you're not sure about the actual ratio your future artwork page or canvas uses, Google what it would be with the measurements. I typically use a 20 by 30 centimeter canvas size in my digital art, so the ratio I'm going to show you as an example would be 2 by 3 for a portrait preview. You can't do anything like rotating a ratio preview like you could when you use your exported model image later, so you'll have to take into account the angle you want your model to be in as well. Also, if you keep this ratio preview turned on when you go to export your model as an image, the dark grey crop will save in the image as well. Keeping it could be helpful in realigning your model, but also could be a pain in the ass if you want to play around with the final placement. I'm a fan of the latter, so I'm going to disable the ratio crop by selecting the button again and choosing disable. Now this next part is where we can start to experiment and personalize. You might have already guessed, but this collection of nice DesignDoll orbs are presets of color and lighting treatments you can use on your model. Now if you're still looking at your model in low quality, you're not going to see much change, but for those of you following along with me, I'd like you to take note that our model is currently using this preset right here. A deep red base with a very shiny reflective finish that appears almost metallic. But if we scroll through all the presets here, you'll see you have a bunch of different effects you can apply to your model. These could be used to help you create lighting and shadow experiment references. Some presets you may need to choose a darker background fill to help you make out the form, especially with the pale skin tones. There is little to no dimension there. It's always good practice to work with contrasting background colors just to help you visualize things better while you adjust the effects. I picked the preset that uses a decent contrast range that will help me make out the shapes of my model clearly, which would be this basic matte gray preset. And now with that done, and the guides and shadows turned off and the background cast in white, our model is now ready to export for a reference. Now the fun part. You may have already figured out how you're going to use your model for reference thanks to the ratio crop from earlier. Before you export, you'll need to double check that your model is placed in the center of the 3D camera's view, or at least positioned within the crop size you chose by adjusting the ratio preview earlier. All good? Alright, now you can select File and then the Export Flat Image option. Unfortunately, from here it's not as simple as choosing a file name and file type and away we go. No. I'd like to direct your attention towards the width and height numbers that you can change right here. These dictate the size and crop of your current camera view, just like the ratio crop in the effects toolbar does. You'll need to enter the dimensions you're wanting to use in pixel size, so this is another good time to look to Google for help in finding the correct pixel dimensions you'll need for the print size you're after. Or if you're using a digital art program, most will show you the different measurement variations when you create your blank canvas. If you're planning to print the model image you export directly, or want to place it as your reference on a digital canvas that you'll later print when the final artwork is done, you will need to make sure that you search for the equivalent pixel value with a 300 dpi resolution as opposed to a default screen 72 dpi resolution. As I'm working with my usual 20 by 30 cm printable canvas, if I use the pixel calculator I found via Google, it'll show me I need to size my model export to be at least 2,362 pixels wide by 3,543 pixels tall. Pick the image type that will be compatible with your art program, and save your image where you can easily grab it, typically within the same area as the artwork you're making. And here's your image exported using the exact ratio crop I previewed to place my model earlier. And because we turned off the cast, shadow, and grid, our model doesn't have to compete for visual attention and will be less confusing to work with later. Now if you zoom into the image at actual size, you will unfortunately see that it's not exactly the sharpest image you could get, especially if you're dealing with an establishing view of your model from far away. But this shouldn't put you off, as you can still work with the anatomy and pose just fine. If you're using the free version, I suggest you keep the program open for a little while after you've finished your model, just in case you need to make changes. Now for my digital art mutuals, it's time to open up the art program of your choice, be it on your computer or your tablet. Then get your planned blank canvas ready. In Photoshop CC 2018, these are the settings I'll be using. And now you can import or place the image of your model that you saved earlier, either by directly dragging it into the program from File Explorer, or in Photoshop's case, you can mouse over to the File button and then place Embedded to find and add your model. I also have a few helpful tips for placing your model images in Photoshop. Sorry, I don't know the equivalents in other programs. So say you have a dark background or colored background you want to place your model into before you start sketching. Well, if you double click the DesignDoll image layer, you'll open up the layer style window and blending options tab. Mouse down to the blend if section at the bottom and adjust the white arrowhead on this slider by dragging it across until most of the white background is cut out, but the white used in your model is still present if you're using a model similar to mine. You can further refine the edge by holding down the Alt button on your keyboard and clicking and dragging the same arrowhead to separate it into sections to feather the selection slightly. You might end up with a number range of 240 by 245. You can also use this adjustment if you're wanting to add different model files onto your canvas so they can overlap each other. I also recommend before you get to sketching over your model that you use a white background before you select the DesignDoll image layer and bump the opacity down between 30 and 50% so the drawing you're going to create doesn't compete for your eye's attention. Add a new layer over the top of your model image, and you're all set and ready to start creating your new artwork. Don't feel reined in by your model though, it's only there to aid you, so feel free to change the shape of some things. Maybe you might end up tweaking the pose a bit. It's not a crime if you change your mind. You can either draw the change yourself, or you can go back to your DesignDoll file and adjust your model, save it over your original export file, and then update it in your art program. Congratulations, you made it to the end of this lesson, and I reckon you're ready to start working with DesignDoll on your own. You can always come back to today's lesson if you ever need to brush up on using certain tools, but I hope you found this tutorial helpful. There are a few features in the program that I've yet to use myself, so there's definitely still more you can learn, but I was able to pick up on a lot just by spending time experimenting. I hope you enjoyed your time in DesignDoll today and feel like you have a stronger grasp on how to make the program work best for you. Feel free to share your finished projects with me below or on social media. If you have any requests for future tutorials you'd like me to cover and create, feel free to leave a comment with your idea as well. Thanks for watching everyone. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to flick that like button or leave a comment below. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. I upload every fortnight, and feel free to check out some of my other videos in the meantime. See ya!